Hi, everybody. Welcome to the DevOps Online Summit. Talk about patterns and anti-patterns for DevOps. And I have with us Spyridon, and I'm terrible with pronunciation of names I'm not familiar with. Could you give us your last name, Spyridon?
Maniotis. Well, actually, you don't need to memorize this one because I'm probably the one and only Spyridon you meet in your life.
That's quite possibly true. I had to go and look up the name to see if I could figure out how to pronounce it. So it's good to have unique names. It's easy to get lost in the crowd otherwise.
Exactly.
So Spyridon, what are you going to talk to us about today?
Right. So basically, we're gonna talk a little bit of patterns and anti-patterns, and these are basically derived by my experience both in the industry and consulting. And surprisingly enough, or maybe not surprisingly enough, I've seen the same ones being replicated across organizations and industries. My background and experience primarily comes from the FSI industry, financial services institutions. I've worked with two banks. I'm currently employed in one of them. And when I was in consulting, I work also with companies in the pension and payment industry. And I've chosen some specific ones that I've seen actually being replicated all the time, and I still don't understand the reason why. So one is one is omitting operations in the DevOps adoption, and that's pretty interesting because looking into the DevOps acronym, the latter part is Ops. So it's more than obvious to involve Ops. The second one is looking into compliance and implementing segregation of duties, which I've seen pretty badly and harshly implemented in many cases. Then talk a little bit why you need to give autonomy to your engineers, but also make sure you don't fall into the pitfall, trust me, I'm an engineer, and actually have some mechanisms in order to have a trust but verify process. We're going to talk on why DevOps is much more than CI/CD pipelines. Actually, this is my favorite one. If I go now on the street and I ask some people, what's your perception of DevOps? They're going to mention CI/CD. And that's very interesting. And then also look into something very important that organizations omit, but it can be a great tool on how to do an adoption at relevance. So actually, especially if we look into big enterprises, you can find a lot of similarities across teams, applications, business units, but there are also many differences. And it's very important not to try to put everyone into the same t-shirt size and make sure that the way you do it has a lot of good thinking on how it can be in alignment and relevance. So these are a little bit of the topics. I have to make a little bit of disclaimer. Actually, introduce who I am. I'm heading the DevSecOps Center of Excellence at Danske Bank. We are a Nordic bank. And my input today represents my whole career on DevOps and what I have discovered, and not necessarily views either of the firm or things that I've only seen at Danske Bank.
Yeah, absolutely. So, yeah, it's interesting. One of the things I've witnessed looking at other companies when it comes to DevOps, and you talk about leaving ops out of it, I've seen it driven from ops. I've seen it driven from development. And they all seem to look at it from their individual perspective and then say we're doing DevOps. So what have you seen?
I've seen exactly the same. And actually, I've seen most of the adoptions I've seen are more development-centric. And this is a lot of motives for this. Some of which that I've spotted is that many companies do treat operations as a supportive unit. Many companies have done outsourcing of operations. There is a tendency that even business units feel that new functionality is more important than stability. But also, it is a perception of operations being something that is only incident, problem, and change management, while in essence is much more than that. And what I've seen typically in my experience is that operations is put at the corner and they're just being receivers of new functionality and new releases, often without even being informed and being part of the software development lifecycle. And what I've seen very visibly and profoundly is developers leaving the office at 5:30 after the code has been deployed, go enjoying their life, and then you see operations being on call till midnight. And that creates, all these situations create even more tension because on the one hand, you don't grasp the totality of benefits by engaging everyone who has a part in the software development lifecycle, but also creates tensions in the teams and a very unhealthy blame game that in many cases also, and let's be bold, right? We don't live in heaven, is also being promoted by managerial hidden motives.
Mm-hmm.
What we used to call in one of the companies I used to work for, dark nights at the corridor. And it's a typical example because it does impact the environmental climate within the company. It can impact quality of releases, but eventually the ones that they see the greater impact is the end user, whether this is within the firm or outside the firm.
Yeah, I've seen a lot of the same things, and I think one of the struggles is it's called DevOps. And when you really dig into it, it's improving the flow of delivery to that customer and organizing everything around that. And I think if people change their mindset to, it's not DevOps, it's the entire organization.
Which is actually very much correct. So, I mean, one advice that I would give to anyone looking into large enterprises on adopting DevOps is it's a DevOps ecosystem that essentially needs to come into play, right? You do have people that write code, you do have people that run services. In some cases, in less regulated industries, this is the same person shifting hats. But then you have people offering you to your infrastructure, you do have compliance, you have managed services, you have business units, you have process governance. So in order to achieve a DevOps at scale and enterprise adoption that really pays off on your outcomes and objectives, it is really engaging the ecosystem. Nevertheless, what I agree with and what I've seen in my career and approaches I follow, before engaging the whole ecosystem, we need to start with the starting actors. And basically, the starting actors is the people that build code, the people that run code, maybe it's the same person, and the product owner who is the one requesting the new code. And then you need to start building the ecosystem around them. So basically, start picking it up, which are the most important units, and then you get the pieces of the puzzle together. And here is actually the most important thing, because you look at the flow. So you look at the flow of your operational context. I need to write code. I need to build this code. Where do I consume the building capabilities from? Where do I get the server provision so I can deploy my services? Who is giving me guidelines on which are the compliance requirements I need to meet? And started looking into the whole SDLC, you see that it's actually, for some, it's scary how many people they need to involve in order to make sure that they look at the front to back adoption.
No, I think that hits right on it, is that, all those dependencies, they're all hidden. People think that they're just the normal pain that you should go through. And when you start showing those dependencies and start working on trying to clear those dependencies and improve the flow, and that's really what it's about. It's just improving the flow. So you talk about it's much more than CI/CD, and I agree. I think the CD is core to it, but everyone focuses on the tools. So what is your perspective on that?
My perspective, I will tell you what it is, and here I'll be a little bit bold, right?
Sure.
People perceive DevOps as only being CI/CD, in my opinion, primarily for two reasons. One, because it is the coolest part of DevOps. And then because it is indeed the reality. And
it's
then
fun.
And then also because it makes DevOps simple to understand. So what it is a source code repo, it is a build tool, some code scanning, have a staging area, have a deployment tool, monitoring, logging, I'm done. And that actually makes a concept which is vast, and it's really vast. I can tell you this, in my current firm, actually working on our new DevOps operating model, we have identified more than 30 domains that need to come into play in order to really talk about an enterprise DevOps house. The CI/CD is one out of the 30. But it's easy for people to oversimplify reality. On the one hand, because they want to do what is funny, and on the other hand, to make sure that they don't necessarily need to learn something new every day.
Well, and I think that comes back to something else you were talking about in your introduction. You were talking about people standardizing things. And one of the things I fight against all the time is there's some things we absolutely should standardize. And there are very few, right? Because it's contextual. So, I mean, talk about that a little bit.
So standardization is great because it can provide a lot of efficiencies. And actually, where I have seen standardization primarily paying off is one, on keeping operational costs under control. Secondly, support on scaling very fast. And thirdly, it does support greatly when it comes to compliance and regulatory demand. So I'm very fan of it, but I'm fan of it to the extent that makes sense. And I think the makes sense here is the right wording. Also, because we need to, on the one hand, not restrict creativity and innovation in organizations. We need to give the possibility to experiment. Then in some cases, the technological platforms, and especially the ones coming from vendors out of the box, have some specialities and tools embedded on them that deviate a little bit from standardization. And then another area is that it is very difficult to get everything you want in some cases from single tools. So you need to have tools playing with each other. A great example of this one is test automation or observability. Especially when, let's stick into test automation because that's the most interesting part and that's why it's out of the most difficult to achieve. If you look into a typical test automation level ladder, we talk about 5, 6, 7 different levels: unit test, regression test, integration, penetration. There's no single tool out there that can do everything. So this is actually an example where standardization is important, but then you need to allow for flexibility and build an ecosystem that then be conscious that it can be plug and play to your standard offerings.
No, I agree. I think compliance is another interesting thing that I talk about. Security and compliance both is that we need to standardize those, but in the pipeline, right? If they're not in the pipeline, it's just theater. It's my opinion anyway.
I fully agree with this one. And this is a pain that I've seen in different organizations. So ideally, you do have compliance as code. I know we talk everything as code lately. Maybe soon it's going to be our life as code. But definitely compliance as code and policy engineering is something very important from a regulatory perspective in order to, on the one hand, ensure compliance out of the box. I mean, ideally, what you want to do with compliance is that people are compliant without realizing them.
Right.
And that will mean that they get everything out of the box. You don't slow them down. And you have event-driven and on-demand evidence on this compliance for your regulators. So standardization definitely can help a lot on that matter. And in certain cases, actually, I've seen the regulators themselves demanding commonalities. I can tell you one example that I'm very familiar with from different companies in the FSI that they more or less have the same regulatory bodies, that everyone says you need to have one model of doing things. We do understand that not everyone can fit, but you need to have a center, the direction on where you take your organization.
Yeah, I think it's interesting that people, for some reason, think that manual compliance review is more truthful than having a repeatable, versioned, automated, auditable compliance that can't be forgotten, isn't based on emotion. It's just repeatable steps. If it's repeatable, it should be automated. I don't understand why people think that should be manual.
I think actually, I'm a big fan of Google. I can reveal that, and I've been inspired a lot by a lot of things they do, especially the site reliability engineering setup. And basically, they say that whatever is repeatable and automatable, just automate it, without automating everything, because then you can get into the fatal broad failures if everything is automated and fails at once. I mean, when it comes into manual interventions into these areas, I will use, I think the motives are two. One is speculation. Allow me to call it speculation. So some people need to have a job. And I hope I won't sound arrogant saying that or be perceived weirdly, but some people, they on purpose want things to be manual, so they can maintain the crown they have, like the SME. And then there are some things that cannot be automated. And a great example of this one is when it comes to architectural evaluations.
Sure.
You need human hands and human brain and human eyes to look into an architecture and tell you whether it is meeting your reliability engineering patterns, whether it is meeting your scalability requirements, and so on. I don't think the industry overall, not only DevOps and the financial services, have advanced so much that a robot can go and assess your cluster if it is designed secure, reliable, and compliant.
Yeah, I agree. I think that if it's rules based, people shouldn't be doing it. With things like architecture, that's not rules, right? That
Mhm.
sometimes that's gut feel and just experience. I agree.
Correct. Especially the latter, actually, especially experience.
Yeah. Well, gut feel based off experience is what I meant. So yes,
Indeed.
this just doesn't look right. Um, so you were talking about the importance of understanding the DevOps is much more than CD. When you talk about uh, killing that misconception early, if you're trying to scale improvement, why is that so important?
So basically, misconception. I will give that example. It comes from the Bible. I'm not religious, by the way, but it's the great example of the Babel Tower that they were building, and the
Mm-hmm.
workers were speaking different language, so they couldn't understand each other, and they never managed to build it. I see the same on the DevOps adoption, and I can tell you where I see the biggest misconceptions. Right, the first one is when it comes to release velocity. What is release velocity? The second one is what is a release? What is a deployment? Then a lot of misconceptions on what is self-healing, what is auto-healing, and then overall misperceptions on the concept itself. With the primary one, as we discussed, saying I have a CI/CD pipeline, I have a very good release velocity, so I'm done. And then it's this phrase that you do DDD, deploy, and then everything is fine. And actually, I'm seeing it in meetings, and I'm still seeing
Yeah.
it that we leave the meetings being in disagreement, while in reality we have agreed, but we use different words to describe the same thing. And I can give you the simplest. This is a cultural thing, and a culture is not tangible, and you cannot change it very fast.
Mm-hmm.
But one of the simple things you can do and have done in the past, and also we're using in my current firm, is create a lexicon.
Mm-hmm.
It might sound naive, it might sound simple, but actually a lexicon that you embed into your frameworks, models, the way you communicate, it's something that can help you to start speaking the same language. And once you start speaking the same language, you can better understand each other, resolve disputes. And when you talk about concepts and vision and objectives, come into coalition much faster. I've seen people in meetings actually almost yelling to each other but they were talking about the same thing and they were using different words.
I know. I this is something I'm really in agreement with. In fact, at my previous employer, I just finished working on an effort with that of establishing languages around metrics and testing. And not only did that establish a common lexicon, but it also started building communities of people in different value streams who could talk to each other and collaborate across value streams because they went through that effort together to come up with a common language so that we can scale knowledge. It's incredibly important. It's core to domain-driven design. And you, to your point, people think it's so obvious that people just miss it.
Correct. And actually, you talked about areas, people from different areas of expertise coming together. And we talked about the big ecosystem, but this ecosystem is being divided in sub-ecosystems. And it's okay in a sub-ecosystem of certain expertise that you speak a little bit of different language because that's your context. But at the end of the day, when you look at the broader ecosystem, everyone needs to be coming at the same picture. And if I make it a little bit more profound, why it is important, it's also, for instance, one of the main areas that you need to have a lot of negotiations and understand each other is your regulator.
Mm-hmm.
And there can be cases that you have people from the same company meeting the regulator and not only speaking different language with the regulator, which is quite often because the regulators are going really by the law book. They don't use the daily argo. Then basically you don't understand what your regulator wants in this. And I've seen that happening actually. It was very. I have this nice story. So it's in one of the companies I used to work on, and then the regulator came with their audit report and things that we had to do. And then we started a big discussion. What do they mean with this word and what do they mean with this word? And why I use the DevOps lexicon is that there were people literally that they went to the Oxford lexicon and they were copy pasting definitions in order to support their arguments that the regulator in this sentence mean this and that because see the definition of the Oxford lexicon. And this can sound funny stories, but actually a reality.
Yeah. Honestly, the way I talk about this is I used to think this is a technical problem, and it's entirely communication problem. It's just how do we optimize the flow of communication, and it's not just by aligning cross-functional teams, because, like you said, we have to use the same words, have to have those common definitions. So you talk about trust but verify, mm-hmm. and you say it's good for the organization and society and regulators. So to talk a little bit about that, that's interesting.
I mean, at the end of the day, what I have seen, and I hope I will be misperceived at the moment, primarily when we talk about delivery of software, we talk about engineers and developers. Mm-hmm. And engineers and developers are very creative. They're very intelligent people. I admire them. But in many cases, they think that they forget that they work for a corporation, and they think that this is the pet project they have at home in the afternoon. And this is where excess innovation is coming, and in some extreme cases that we push the boundaries on the technological side, while we do put risk on non-functional aspects. And when you're in the regulated industry, and the financial service industry, where I mean is very regulated, you need to be able to prove to your internal audit to begin with, and then your regulator and the society, that you take adequate measurements in order to ensure compliance. And I can tell you this thing, and this is exactly how the regulators put it on their reports, and I have read it in many of them. When they do find findings of security gaps, compliance gaps, at the end of its report, and all they do the same, they say that we do believe that company X does not fulfill the criteria in order to serve its clients and society in a secure way. So it's actually a wording coming directly from the regulators. And if I may bring some examples why it can impact the society. If we don't have, let's say, in the case that you don't have solid governance and solid controls on the cloud migration, and then you do move data to the public cloud, and then that data is being stolen, and then my account and your account are being disclosure to a hacker who comes, I don't know from where, then your sloppiness on your cloud governance can lead actually to severe society impact. That spams to individuals. But then even if we don't go into that extreme and we go internally, you need internally to be able to verify that people are well behaving. And that's because you are the same ecosystem. Applications don't live in isolation. Applications have integrations. There are business units that have flow dependencies. So ensuring that you're compliant and you're using certain security mechanisms and you ensure quality is also important internally. I have been in places, and people that are working with data warehouses actually can really feel that on their skin, because data warehouses is where all the data ends up. People not taking quality controls and trusting, and just trusting but not verifying on the sources, and then make warehouses look like, allow me the expression, garbage bins. So it can have multiple effects of not doing it. And of course, when we say trust but verify, we don't talk micromanagement. We talk an engineered way of verifying that the things are well taken care. And of course, as we mentioned before, embed it as much as possible into your processes and technology, so you don't slow your flow, but also make sure that people don't perceive that you're behind their neck all the time.
Yeah, so I've been, I'm a software engineer. I've been one for more than 2 decades, and I can tell you from my experiences that we have a tendency as software engineers to fall into the trap of falling in love with the technology. And, I keep reminding my peers on teams I've worked on is that we need to fall in love with the business problem. To your point, we're trying to solve a business problem with technology. We're not trying to solve technology. And that we should be business experts solving business problems with code, not coders.
Correct. It is this saying actually at banks, and I hope I won't be misperceived now, but I've heard in several financial service institutions that IT is the business, which actually it does have a lot of truth in it, but also it can be misperceived. Fitting exactly to the example you gave, that technology is there to solve business problems, not to become not to build. I mean, I use this example because I see the same mentality in many cases. Not to build Netflix inside a bank. That's not the scope. The scope is to make the bank run smoothly, securely, in compliant way, serving the society, because that's what it does in the essence. It's not to become a technological powerhouse without reason. And primarily, when you see the problems with the misbehavior, it's really when you try to become a powerhouse because you go for excess innovation, and maybe you don't even know how to handle excess innovation from a control perspective. And also, this I have seen, and I hope that the regulatory bodies won't take me wrong at the moment, but what I've seen myself is that the industry is moving faster than the regulators. So in some cases, going very fast. It's even your regulator themselves that they cannot do a proper assessment on your compliance and security capabilities. And that is misleading because you go home free, but in essence, you're not.
Yeah, I think it goes back to relationships. I mean, it's really important to start building early relationships with compliance and regulators to make sure that the auditor understands what you're doing and that they know that you're trying to help and not just make their job harder.
Exactly. So if I may bring an example to many things, for instance, we are doing in my current firm, we do get advisory by IT business risk and control unit, by our legal unit, procurement unit. It is the same advisory you don't take from your regulator. So tell them I have this amazing plan. I'm going to move this ecosystem in the clouds. It's cloud native. I have controls. I have everywhere. Can you come and tell me if you're fine with it? And if you know any regulation that is in the making somewhere in Luxembourg and it's going to come in 6 months and then I will have problems. So building this relation is very important. And it's especially in these cases when we talk about legal and compliance stuff, trust is very important. And if you build trust at the beginning, if you're going to be a little bit sloppy at some point due to different circumstances, your regulator will understand. Because humans we all do mistakes. You haven't sold us in the past that you're a bad boy, to put it that way.
Well, that in trust, I think, is very much underrated, especially you were talking earlier about managers micromanaging teams and not to do that. You touched on that a little bit. And you also talked about safety. As an engineer, if I don't trust the people that I work for are trying to help me instead of just beat me with a stick, then that makes from my perspective, I'm not going to feel like I can openly tell them when there's problems. And that could have impact, right?
From your perspective, and I hope none misunderstand us at the moment, from your perspective, either you got to hide things under the carpet till the carpet grows in height enough so no one can hide anything anymore, or you're going to look for another place. And actually, we have to be a little bit careful, especially in the DevOps area and the micromanagement aspect, because if in order to do a solid DevOps adoption, you need to micromanage, then you failed. Right. The DevOps adoption is based on trust, it's based on psychological safety, it's based on continuity and in organic growth. And when we talk organic growth, it's not management deciding. It is the organization that needs to find its steps, and there's no golden recipe for that. Evolve the setup in harmony.
No, I think that's absolutely key, that you're changing the organization. And if you're going to get a new culture, you don't necessarily know what that new culture is. But, you know, the thing that I take away, so I worked for a long time for Walmart. And Walmart puts the customer first. It's right there in the cheer that we have. It's the customer always. And I think if all organizations and everybody in that organization focuses on the customer, then DevOps becomes a lot easier to think about.
And I will tell you why. Because in a DevOps adoption, at least in my humble opinion, you focus on outcomes. And who is the receiver of the outcomes? The end customer.
Yeah.
And this is why also it's very important. And another anti-pattern that is also a little bit derived by what we talked before, forgetting about operations. Forgetting about operations also in many cases means forgetting about quality and non-functional requirements. The fact that I did ship the new amazing functionality and I click this button and cool stuff happen, it's not enough if my application is crumbling.
Yeah.
or if it gets low. Actually, in many cases, and I read that in the course I had about user experience design, in many cases, availability and speed is and reliability is even more important than the actual functionality.
Oh, I agree. I think this goes back to people pushing features all the time just to say that we're done and meet a date, but it doesn't matter if we met the date if it doesn't work. And to your point, availability is user experience.
Exactly.
Right? If it's shiny and broken, who cares?
And see yourself, actually, if you try to use an application, it has a little bit of limited feature. It cannot do everything you want, right? But it's very fast, or anytime you open it, it's great. And then compare an application that it's amazing, it has every single feature of the world, but every time you open it, it takes 2 minutes to load. When you click a button, it shuts down, and you gotta go to the former one, right? And that actually profoundly shows that when we look into DevOps adoptions and forget about the outcomes, and actually the outcomes is what is. There was this word actually I did an internship many years ago in a car company, and actually that's I can tell you this is actually a great term in their non-functional requirements, which is reliability, security, availability. They had one that they used to call it desirability. And that was a combination of all non-functional requirements saying that what we make is desirable because it is highly available, it is reliable, it is secure, and so on. And actually, this desirability element is very important also from a DevOps perspective.
Yeah, that's good. Yeah, I like that because it could be really slick, and if nobody wants to use it, I mean, it can be stable, it can be shiny, but if it's not valuable to me, I don't care. So that's good. Well, Spyridon, what sort of like big takeaways would you and what do you want people to really focus on next?
In their DevOps adoption, to make sure they sit together and they define what DevOps means for them, and actually focus on the outcomes. It's this expression that I really believe in, that DevOps is what you make out of it, and this is true. So sitting together and understanding what you want to achieve, it is the first and most important starting point. So focusing on outcomes, and then if I may just pick up some bullet points.
Sure.
Define what DevOps means for your context, right? Bring operations in, whether there is a different team, organization, or you name it. Remember that the CI/CD pipeline is only one of the technological backbones, right? You have ITSM tools, you have network storage, right? It's only one. We got to understand that. Of course, it is if you're a factory, it is your means to production, right? That's where you ship the products from, but it's only one element. Do it at relevance. Don't bundle everyone in the same category. It doesn't worth it. You don't need it. You gotta just overdo it without reason. Focus on flow. Don't look into isolated KPIs that really won't tell you anything. And when you look into this flow and you define parameters, just be a little bit intelligent and avoid the typical 30% of test automation, of regression tests is automated. It doesn't tell you anything. That you have a release velocity of 20 minutes, again, it doesn't tell you anything. So just look in the flow and create some linkage between them. And then when it comes to compliance, don't overdo it. At the same time, don't cheat. Engage, because it's humans we are. Engage with your regulator early days. Understand their motives. Explain to them what is your current context. Explain to them maybe why it doesn't look so good at the moment and what are the challenges you have. And actually get into a negotiation, bargaining relationship and get it to support you actually to achieve what you want. I've seen it myself, and I'm going to go back in time now. It was beginning of 2016. In a place that I used to work, we did have an audit. The regulator came in, and in some cases, there were totally no sense to what they were asking. And that was because they simply didn't understand back in that day that, okay, it's not waterfall anymore. It's maybe not even Scrum anymore. It's something more advanced. So in some cases, they were requesting things that, there was no reason to implement. But then engaging into this discussion and make them to understand, then you make it much better. And then engage them proactively when you do radical innovation. Because if you do radical innovation alone and you don't engage them, maybe 6 months they're going to come and tell you, shut down, everything you've done is non-compliant due to this new ISO, yada, 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 yada. So this is a little bit of tips and tricks. Start speaking the same language. And I know that people intentionally, in some cases, they won't speak the same language because they have their own motives. You know, is this thing that you tell me something now, Brian, I tell you I don't understand it. But that's not because I don't understand what you say, but I have my own motives and I pretend you don't know what you talk about. Mm-hmm. So be a little bit mindful as well with questions. And then definitely engage the ecosystem. As I said, start with the core. Start with what are the most important actors. In my opinion, this is the product owner and the teams that build and run software. And then slowly open up. And open up not only because you need many more capabilities to advance and succeed to what you want, but also get people to buy into what you're doing, because if you don't get them engaged from the beginning, they cannot really predict the way you're going to go. And I can give you a profound example that I've seen in many cases. It's the religious conflict between ITIL and DevOps. We've implemented ITIL, we have incident problem management release. What do you mean that it doesn't fit your DevOps adoption? And then people say, okay, the two will come into conflict. In essence, they don't come into conflict, right? Even in DevOps, you need a good process governance foundation to build on top. Mm-hmm. And then I can go a bit further. I have amazing stories. We can have only a session on that one. And then site reliability engineering comes. And then you're like, we have ITIL, we have DevOps. What is this arena? What is this brand new thing? But if you put your mind down and take a scenario, all this, you can get the best of the elements that fit your adoption and actually make them work equally well. And a little bit of advice on the operations bit. Explore a little bit the SRE concept. Explore a little bit autonomous operations principles in chaos engineering. And then you're going to really see that not only shifting operations left is important, but it can be a game changer, actually. So that is very briefly. I mean, there can be, if I say hundreds of lessons learned, I won't exaggerate, right?
That's awesome. And there's a reason there's books and books and books on this stuff. I think everyone should dig in.
And
so Spyridon, I'm sorry, go ahead.
And I hope I won't sound like advertising Google a lot, but what I like on Google is publications. They make it very clear that the intention is to inspire you, not to tell you how to do it. And actually, this is what all of us we need to understand when we go out there for inspiration. That we cannot implement a context, a setup from another context, one-to-one to our context, because simply our contexts are different and our needs are different.
Yeah, I think that's incredibly important. So, Spyridon, where can people reach out to you if they have questions or like to talk to you about some of this stuff?
They can definitely reach out to my LinkedIn profile. Also, they can write to me on my email. That's my first name, Spyridon.Maniotis, my surname @gmail.com. I'm very happy actually to talk with people that we work with the same context and exchange experiences. I love virtual coffees, and I really have the mentality that I want to give to the DevOps community. So I'm very open to be discussing.
Well, I'll say that personally, my experience has been the entire DevOps community is that way, that all of us want to give. That I think anybody who's new to this should not be afraid to ask questions from random people, that all of us are incredibly open about trying to help.
Absolutely. This is actually how we can grow the community and make it more mature, right? I don't recall who he was or who she was, that said that smart people learn from the mistakes of others, not from their own mistakes.
Yes.
So if we can all listen to each other and not lift up our game, right? Accept that some are more advanced than us and be open-minded and listen to them, we can avoid a lot of bottlenecks and bumpy rides on our journey.
I agree. Well, Spyridon, it was really great talking to you, and thank you so much for joining DevOps Online Summit.
Thank you very much, Brian. A pleasure, and I hope we're going to have the chance to talk again soon.
Absolutely.